Rowena Caldwell caught the 5-year wage assignment before Aunt Frederica could press her seal into the wax. "If your grace has bought anything tonight, it is my aunt's debt, not me," she said as the Duke extended an empty gloved hand instead of reaching for her. Frederica warned that refusal meant no home and no wages, and Horatio asked Rowena, not her aunt, to hand him the paper, only if she wished him to read it. The brass seal knocked against its saucer as Rowena drew the parchment against her knees. Frederica stood to her left in burgundy silk, one hand above the cooling wax. A maid had gone still in the doorway. Across from them, the Duke's travelling shawl lay over his left arm. His right hand remained open between them. "You belong to this household for 5 years," Frederica said. "His Grace has settled the notes that kept a roof over your head. You will be useful here, and you will be grateful that I found a place for you." Rowena nearly smiled at the maid, instinctively trying to ease the room. Instead, she looked at the paper. 5 years is a very expensive roof, Aunt Frederica." Her voice did not shake. "If I refuse to sign, where am I expected to sleep tonight?" "Outside, if necessary. No respectable household will hire a woman who breaks a family agreement." Horatio's open hand lowered, but he did not reach for the page. "Mrs. Easton, you will stop speaking as though Miss Caldwell's future were yours to assign." Frederica stared at him. He turned to Rowena. "I paid your aunt's creditor. That payment extinguished her debt note. It created no claim upon your service, your wages, or your signature." The room seemed to lose a degree of heat. Rowena kept hold of the parchment. "Then what precisely did you buy?" A faint change touched his mouth. Silence from a persistent creditor. Only then did Rowena place the unsealed draft in his palm. Horatio folded it once. "You have 2 choices tonight, Miss Caldwell, and neither changes what I have just told you. You may remain here as a guest until morning, then take carriage fare and paid lodging while you seek another position. Or you may remain long enough to hear an offer of employment from me. Your aunt's debt is settled either way." He looked toward the maid. "Please move Miss Caldwell's trunk away from the door." The maid obeyed. That scrape of leather across the floor did more to convince Rowena than any speech might have done. Her trunk was no longer waiting to be thrown into the night, and no one had asked for a promise in return. "I will hear the employment offer," she said. Frederica's sleeves rustled as she folded her arms. "This is absurd. She is a dependent. Her board has been paid for." "Her board is no longer your business tonight," Horatio said. "Your carriage is waiting Mrs. Easton." Frederica looked from him to Rowena, found no one willing to carry her argument, and left. The door closed with a hard, final sound. The rumors had called the Duke severe. None had mentioned a man who kept a debt settlement and an offer of work on separate sheets. Horatio crossed to a small writing desk near the window and picked up a different sheet of paper. He brought it to the low table between them. "I require a governess for my daughter Constance," Horatio said. "She is 9. The position is for 6 months. It includes a private room in the East Wing, a fixed quarterly salary, and a guaranteed reference when you choose to leave." Rowena leaned forward, her practical nature immediately asserting itself. "A guaranteed reference, even if I choose to leave before the 6 months are entirely concluded, or if I find the work unsuited to my abilities?" "Yes," Horatio said. "And the salary?" Horatio named a figure that was not only fair, but generous. It was enough to build a modest saving. Children famously sleep only when contracts say so. Rowena noted a defensive spark of humor finally breaking through. "I will need specific evening limits, and 1 half-day free each week where I am not expected to pour tea, mend ribbons, or act as an unpaid companion." Horatio did not look offended. He reached into his pocket, produced a silver pencil, and leaned over the table. "Which evening hours do you require for yourself?" "After 8 o'clock, Rowena said firmly. He wrote it down. "And the half-day?" "Thursday afternoons." He added it to the paper. He turned the sheet toward her. "Where is the schedule unrealistic?" Rowena looked at the neat, dark script. It was a clean employment contract. There was no mention of Frederica, no mention of debt. If I accept this and later choose to leave, does my aunt's debt resurrect? No, Horatio said. The debt is dead. Your wages will be deposited into an account at the market town in your own name. I have no interest in holding your money. Rowena picked up the pen from the desk. The enib scratched loudly in the quiet room as she signed her name. Rowena Caldwell, governess. Not a purchased dependent. The next morning, the vastness of Penhallow Hall revealed itself in the cold Yorkshire daylight. Rowena was led to the schoolroom on the second floor. A coal fire burned modestly in the grate. Constance Beaumont sat at a heavy oak table, her hands folded over a blank slate. She was a small, dark-haired girl who had, according to the housekeeper, dismissed 2 previous governess candidates simply by refusing to speak a single word to them. Rowena sat across from her. Constance stared at the slate. Rowena did not ask the girl how she felt. She did not offer solemn condolences for the mother who had passed 2 years prior. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out an old cloth-bound book of fables she had found on the nursery shelf. The spine was worn, the fabric soft from use. Rowena opened it to a random page. She cleared her throat with great ceremony. "Let us begin with natural history," Rowena announced brightly. She pointed to a detailed etching of a magnificent stallion. "Ah, yes, the noble Yorkshire goose." Constance's eyes flicked upward. She looked at the picture. She looked at Rowena. "A very fast goose," Rowena continued, smoothly turning the page to show a dog. "And here, of course, is the spotted sheep." Constance frowned. Her small fingers twitched on the slate. Rowena turned another page, revealing a regal lion. "And this obviously is a very angry badger." "That is a lion," Constance said. Her voice was rusty quiet, but firm. Rowena gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror. "Are you quite sure I was told the badgers in Yorkshire were exceptionally large?" "It has a mane," Constance pointed out, pointing at the page. "Geese do not wear saddles either." "I stand corrected," Rowena said, bowing her head. "You shall have to monitor my reading closely, Lady Constance. My natural history is clearly compromised." Rowena glanced toward the doorway and found Horatio there. Constance had not seen him. He did not step inside to praise her for speaking or turn one quiet answer into a household triumph. He only inclined his head once to Rowena and withdrew. The restraint impressed her more than applause would have done. Later that morning, Rowena entered the breakfast room. Horatio was already seated reading a stack of correspondence. He looked up as she took her place. "I am told the Yorkshire badger is a fearsome beast," he said mildly. Rowena smiled, pouring her tea. "Only when provoked, Your Grace. Lady Constance is an excellent instructor." Horatio set his letters down. He did not praise her for fixing his child. He looked at her directly. "Which part of the morning schedule will exhaust you first, Miss Caldwell?" Rowena paused, her teacup halfway to her lips. She had spent 5 years surviving in her aunt's house by proving she was endlessly useful. When asked about burdens, her automatic response was to minimize them. "Oh, governesses are powered entirely by grammar and cold toast." She joked lightly. "I assure you I require nothing." Horatio did not smile. He watched her with a calm, analytical gaze. "I did not ask if you required nothing. I asked which part of the schedule is unreasonable." Rowena lowered her cup. The joke had failed to deflect him. "The 6 o'clock morning walk," she admitted quietly. "It is quite dark and Constance is entirely unawake. We spend an hour freezing in the garden before she is capable of reading. Then we shall move the lesson to 7:30. Horatio said, picking up his pen and making a note on a ledger beside his plate. "There is no virtue in freezing." Rowena stared at him. "Just like that. You do not wish to argue the benefits of early morning constitutionals." "I wish for my daughter to learn and for my governess to remain awake while teaching her," Horatio replied. If the schedule serves neither, the schedule changes. Rowena felt a strange, unsettling warmth. Her aunt would have demanded a week of gratitude for such a concession. Horatio simply treated it as logic. She hid her reaction behind a quick smile. Then I shall have to find another use for my heavy cloak. During their second week, the formal routines of Penhallow Hall began to bend. The schoolroom chimney decided to smoke terribly one Tuesday morning, filling the room with a choking grey haze. A typical employer might have cancelled the lesson or demanded Rowena manage it despite the smoke. Horatio came upstairs to investigate the coughing. He found the schoolroom empty and followed the sound of voices to the long covered gallery in the west wing. Rowena had dragged 2 small rugs onto the polished wooden floor. Constance was standing on a blue rug, looking intensely at a red one. "What is happening here?" Horatio asked. "Geography," Rowena said breathlessly, holding a piece of chalk. "The schoolroom is uninhabitable. Therefore the blue rug is the North Sea. The red rug is France. Constance is currently navigating a trade route." Horatio looked at the rugs. "The chimney sweep will not arrive until tomorrow. I can have the library cleared for your use." "The library has too many fragile vases," Rowena said. She looked at Horatio, a playful glint in her eye. "Since you are here, Your Grace, we lack a major port. Stand on the edge of the blue rug." Horatio blinked. "I beg your pardon. The North Sea requires a port," Constance demanded from her rug. "You must be Hull Papa." Horatio, Duke of Penhallow, looked at his immaculate boots. He looked at the bright, challenging expectation on Rowena's face. He stepped onto the edge of the blue rug. "I am Hull," he stated with absolute gravity. Rowena bit her lip to stop a laugh. She loved that he didn't try to take over the lesson, didn't demand they return to proper desks. He simply accepted the ridiculous role she assigned him. By the following week, Rowena had begun to notice Horatio's entrances before he spoke. During the evening hour, just before her duties ended, the 3 of them sat in the small family library while she read a comic novel aloud. Constance demanded that her father take the voice of a pompous magistrate. Horatio took the book. He read the magistrate's lines with the exact same low, steady, serious tone he used to discuss estate grain yields. Rowena reached over and pressed her hand flat against the page, stopping him mid-sentence. "No, no," she said, laughing. "You sound as if you are sentencing the man to death. He is complaining about a missing hat. You must emphasize the outrage." Horatio's eyes dropped to Rowena's hand, where it lay across the page, then to the ink stains at her fingertips. When he looked up again, she became acutely aware that she had leaned much closer to him than any lesson required. "Outrage," he repeated. "Like this," Rowena demonstrated, puffing out her chest and pitching her voice into a dramatic nasal whine. "My finest beaver hat stolen by a scoundrel." Constance fell back against the cushions in a fit of giggles. Horatio took a breath. He puffed out his chest slightly. "My finest beaver hat," he read, adding a deliberate, ridiculous squeak to the word hat. Rowena laughed until she had to press her lips together. When she looked back, Horatio was still watching her, and the reserve in his face had softened into something almost startled. Heat climbed beneath her collar. She turned toward Constance before either of them could make the moment solemn. For the rest of the chapter, she became inconveniently aware of every time his voice changed because she had corrected him. Once he glanced toward her before delivering an especially foolish line, plainly checking whether she would laugh. Rowena did. The pleasure of being sought for laughter rather than labor was small, private, and far more dangerous than it ought to have been. When Thursday afternoon arrived near the end of their first month, Rowena intended to stay in her room and write a letter. It was her designated half-day. But as she passed the breakfast room, she heard Constance trying to invent nonsensical definitions for complex words, a game they played often. Horatio was attempting to participate and failing miserably. "A philanthropist," Constance declared, "is a person who collects very small, shiny spoons. I believe a philanthropist is someone who promotes the welfare of others, Horatio corrected gently. Papa, you are terrible at this. Constance sighed. Rowena stepped into the doorway. She was not wearing her plain working gown, but a softer pale blue muslin she reserved for herself. A philanthropist, Rowena announced, walking into the room, is obviously a man who cannot stop buying hats for horses. Constance cheered. Horatio stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. Miss Caldwell, it is Thursday afternoon. You are not required to be here. I am aware of the day, Your Grace, Rowena said, smiling. She did not retreat. She walked to the table. This half-hour is mine. I am choosing to spend it badly. Horatio's chair scraped against the floor. A formal thank you seemed to reach his mouth and disappear. Instead, he drew out a chair beside the table. Rowena understood the gesture at once. He was not going to turn her free half-hour into a favor she owed the household. He was merely making room for her. As the 5th week began, Rowena had already started adding small pieces of work to her own days, 10 minutes helping Constance sort leaves, another quarter-hour repairing a lesson plan, one extra chapter because the child asked. She knew the pattern. She simply preferred not to name how tired it made her. On Tuesday evening, Rowena was walking toward the nursery to manage Constance's bedtime routine. As she approached, she heard unfamiliar heavy footsteps. She paused. A stout, capable-looking woman in a grey uniform was standing in the hall holding a nurse's travelling case. Good evening, the woman said briskly. I am Mrs. Higgins. His Grace sent for me from York. I am to take over the evening routines and the morning dressing to reduce the governess's hours. Rowena froze. The warmth of the hallway vanished, replaced by a cold, rushing panic. Reduce her hours. In her aunt's house, being relieved of duties had never been a kindness. It had been the first step toward being declared unnecessary. Horatio had seen her fatigue, and instead of speaking to her, he had quietly brought in someone else. How efficient, Rowena said, forcing brightness into her voice. I seem to have failed inspection before anyone thought to tell me. Please go in. Constance prefers the blue blanket. She turned and walked downstairs before the smile could fail. The family reading nights had begun to feel dangerously like belonging. Now an older lesson pressed back in a place might be warm only until someone decided another woman could do the work better. The next day, Rowena wore cheerfulness like a tightly laced bodice. After lessons, Constance left 3 pencils beneath the table. Rowena was on her knees gathering them before the maid at the doorway could take a step. The last pencil had rolled under a chair. Rowena reached too quickly, struck her knuckles against the carved rail, and laughed as though the sting were a joke. There, she said brightly, setting the pencils in a perfect row. Mrs. Higgins will have no cause to accuse this nursery of harboring dangerous disorder. Horatio had stopped in the doorway. His eyes went once to Rowena's reddened knuckles, then to the smile she held far too steadily. When he asked whether the shortened hours suited her, Rowena answered that she had never felt more efficient. He said nothing more. That was how she knew he believed her performance. Until dinner. Constance looked at Rowena from across the table. Mrs. Higgins says she will be here every night. Are you going away, Miss Rowena? Horatio frowned, looking up from his plate. No one is going away. Rowena's bright mask cracked. She looked at Horatio, the smile completely gone. Aren't they? She stood. Excuse me. She went straight to the small study. A moment later, Horatio entered and closed the door behind him. Miss Caldwell, well, what is the matter? I hired Mrs. Higgins because you were exhausting yourself. I meant to lessen the burden. Rowena turned to face him. Her hands were trembling, but she clasped them tightly before her. This time she did not make the room easier for either of them. You did not merely lessen hours, Your Grace. You brought a stranger into the nursery and gave her my duties without one word to me. If you find my work lacking, tell me. If you mean to dismiss or replace me, use the word. But do not rearrange my life behind my back and call it a kindness. Horatio stopped. The certainty in his posture vanished. "Dismiss you, Rowena, no. I saw you were tired. I wanted to help." "By showing me how easily my place can be given to someone else," she demanded. "My aunt housed me, and she used it to own me. You gave me a contract, and I thought my hours were mine to agree. But if you can cut them and hand my duties to someone else without asking, then I am still a dependent waiting to be managed." For a moment, Horatio said nothing. His hand loosened on the back of the chair. The confusion went out of his face, and Rowena saw comprehension take its place. She waited. If he defended only the goodness of his intention, the room would become very small again. "I was wrong," Horatio said. "I changed your hours without asking you. I should have spoken to you before I arranged anything." He walked to the desk and pulled out the revised schedule he had drafted. He tore it in half. "Your original hours are restored. Mrs. Higgins will be paid the fortnight I promised her because that expense is mine. I will tell the housekeeper that the change was my decision and reflects no failure in your work. Mrs. Higgins will assist only when you ask for her. I will not alter the nursery hours again without your agreement." The breath Rowena had been holding left her slowly. He had not asked her to admire his intention. He had changed the thing that had harmed her, accepted the cost, and left the next choice with her. "Thank you," she whispered. The repair held, but the true test of their new balance came a few days later in the 6th week. It had been a genuinely exhausting day. Constance had been fretful, the weather had trapped them indoors, and Rowena's head pounded relentlessly. As evening approached, the old habit screamed at her to push through to prove her worth by managing bedtime perfectly. She stood in the nursery doorway holding the old cloth-bound book of fables. Horatio was in the hall passing by. Rowena looked at the book, then at Horatio. If she opened it, she knew exactly what would happen. She would smile, read Settle Constance, and call the headache nothing. She closed the cover instead. "Your Grace?" Rowena called softly. He stopped and turned. She held out the book. "Tonight I need my own door shut until morning. I cannot be responsible for the nursery tonight. Can you take the last chapter?" Horatio took the book. "Where did you stop reading?" "Page 42. "I will handle it. Go rest." "Rowena." She went to her room without hovering in the passage. Once the door was shut, she did not listen for nursery footsteps or a bell that might mean she was needed. She slept until morning. The next morning, Rowena came down to breakfast feeling entirely rested. She walked into the breakfast room, half expecting to find chaos or Horatio looking martyred. Instead, Constance was eating toast and looking highly aggrieved. "Papa is a terrible reader," Constance announced the moment Rowena sat down. He read the word triumphant as turnip twice. It ruined the entire story. Horatio, sitting opposite, looked at Rowena with deadpan seriousness. It was dark in the room, and the hero was in fact in a vegetable garden. It was a logical substitution. Rowena stared at him, and then she laughed deeply enough that Constance grinned in triumph. She had put down one burden, and no disaster had followed. No one had reduced her wages. No one had moved her trunk. Her chair at breakfast was still waiting. But outside pressure rarely stays quiet forever. The 7th week brought the crunch of unfamiliar carriage wheels on the gravel drive. Rowena was in the front hall collecting the post when the heavy oak door opened. Frederica Easton swept into the entryway looking furious. "Aunt Frederica!" Rowena said, her spine stiffening instantly. "Do not use that tone with me, you ungrateful girl," Frederica snapped. She ignored the footman who tried to take her cloak. Horatio, hearing the commotion, emerged from his study. Frederica turned her wrath on the Duke. "Your Grace, I have come to correct a severe misunderstanding. My niece has abandoned her familial obligations. I have consulted my own solicitor. That draft you took from me was an assignment of her wages for my care of her. She owes me that money. If she is drawing a salary here, a portion of it must be diverted to me immediately." The threat was clear. Frederica was trying to reassert her ownership, to turn Rowena's independent work back into a debt repayment, dragging her reputation into a public family dispute. Rowena felt the familiar urge to smooth it over, to joke, to placate her aunt, so the servants wouldn't stare. She looked at Horatio. Horatio's jaw tightened. His gaze went to Frederica, and Rowena could almost feel the weight of the order he might have given. Then his hand fell still at his side. He looked at Rowena instead. "Miss Caldwell?" Horatio asked quietly, ignoring Frederica completely. "Which part of this do you want me to carry?" Rowena met his eyes. She did not need him to fight her family. She needed his knowledge of the debt papers and the creditor's settlement. Her work, her wages, and the question of returning to Frederica remained hers. "The debt draft is a legal matter between you and the creditor," Rowena said clearly. "You may handle the paper, Your Grace, but where I work and who I return to is my concern alone." Horatio nodded. He turned to Frederica. "We will resolve this tomorrow morning, Mrs. Easton. At my solicitor's office in town. You will bring your copy of the arrangement. I will bring mine." The next morning, the private office of Mr. Penhallow, the market town solicitor, felt cramped and smelled of old ink and beeswax. A small bracket clock on the mantel counted each second with a dry, deliberate tick. Frederica sat on one side of the mahogany desk, one gloved finger tapping twice against the wood before she stilled it. Rowena and Horatio sat on the other. Frederica laid her copy of the wage draft on the desk. "She owes me 5 years of service or the financial equivalent. His Grace paid the creditor with the understanding that her labor would answer the debt. She cannot take the benefit of that payment and then refuse the obligation." Rowena felt the old pressure in the wording. Benefit, obligation, owes. Frederica could make a meal sound like a mortgage if allowed enough time. Horatio did not answer that part for her. He placed the settled debt note beside the unsigned draft. "Mr. Penhallow," he said, "this records my payment to Mrs. Easton's creditor. This is the separate paper Mrs. Easton represented as an assignment of Miss Caldwell's future wages. Miss Caldwell did not sign it. I have taken no deduction from her salary and claim none." The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. He read the debt note first, then the draft, then Rowena's employment agreement. The clock ticked through the silence. The scratching of his thumbnail against the edge of the paper seemed indecently loud. Frederica shifted in her chair. The intention was perfectly understood. "By whom?" Rowena asked. Her aunt looked at her as if the interruption itself were an offense. Mr. Penhallow set the papers down. "Whatever arrangement existed between you and your creditor, Mrs. Easton. I see no undertaking here by Miss Caldwell assigning her wages. This paper bears no execution by her. His Grace's settlement of your note gives him no title to her service, and it gives you no claim upon the salary due under this later employment." Frederica's mouth tightened. "Then the law rewards ingratitude. The law has said nothing about gratitude," Rowena replied. For an instant Horatio's gaze moved to her. He remained silent. Frederica turned fully toward Rowena. "Do not imagine this room can make you respectable. I gave you a home when you had none. If you persist in this, I shall write to every family that asks after your character. I shall tell them you abandoned the woman who fed you the moment a rich widower paid her debts and offered you a place under his roof. Let us see how many respectable houses want such a governess." The threat landed harder than the failed claim on her wages. A ruined recommendation could close doors no solicitor had power to open. For years, Frederica had needed only the possibility of such talk to make Rowena useful, agreeable, grateful. Rowena's fingers tightened once around the seam of her glove. Horatio did not interrupt. That mattered. If he silenced Frederica with rank, Rowena would leave the room protected, but still dependent upon his name to drown out hers. The choice in front of her was uglier and cleaner than that. She could buy Frederica's silence with obedience, or accept that freedom might come with gossip she could not control. "Then write what you choose," Rowena said. Her voice was quiet. "I will not purchase your silence with my wages, and I will not return to your house to protect myself from what you may say." Frederica stared at her. Rowena continued before courage could turn itself into another joke. "I will fulfill the 6-month position I freely accepted at Penhallow. My wages remain mine. When that term ends, I will decide whether I stay, seek another post, or live elsewhere. You may call that ingratitude if you wish. It is still my decision." There was no applause. Mr. Penhaligon merely drew the wage ledger toward him and made a brief notation. Horatio's hands remained still on the head of his cane. Frederica had expected opposition she could call seduction, arrogance, or ducal interference. Rowena gave her none of those escapes. At last her aunt gathered her papers with sharp, trembling movements. "You will regret burning the only bridge you had." Rowena looked at the unsigned draft. "A bridge that requires 5 years of wages is too expensive to cross." Frederica left without another word. Only when the door had closed did Mr. Penhaligon turn the ledger toward Rowena. "Your salary record stands in your own name, Miss Caldwell. No countersignature from Mrs. Easton is required when you draw upon it. His Grace's reference concerning your employment is a separate matter and remains available under the terms you signed." Rowena read her name once. Rowena Caldwell. Not followed by dependent, not followed by owed to. The ink did not promise that gossip would vanish or that every door in Yorkshire would open. It promised something smaller and more useful. The money she earned belonged to her, and the next door would be hers to choose. She closed the ledger. Outside the street was quiet and cold. Their carriage waited near the solicitor's steps. Horatio offered his hand to assist her, but before Rowena took it, he spoke. "Rowena." Something in his voice made her look up. "Your appointment remains exactly as written. Your wages and your reference do not depend upon what I am about to ask." The careful preface, rather than reassuring her, sent a thin line of alarm through her. She had only just separated one obligation from another. Affection could make knots as easily as debt if people were careless with it. Horatio drew a breath. "I would like your permission to court you." For one bright instant she wanted simply to say yes. Then her fingers found the edge of the folded wage record inside her reticule, and she stopped herself. "If I say no now?" she asked. "My place at Penhallow does not change." "No." "And if I say yes now, then later ask you to stop?" His answer came without hesitation. "Then I stop. Your appointment, wages, and reference remain exactly as they are." Rowena searched his face. "I have only just disentangled one obligation from another, Horatio. I will not knot them together again, merely because the second one is kinder. Nor will I." There it was, the small space in which a refusal could live without costing her breadwork reputation from him or a roof for the term she had chosen. The fear did not vanish. It simply ceased to own the answer. Rowena put her hand in his. "You may court me, Your Grace," she said, and her smile came freely. "But I warn you, my natural history is still terrible." A hint of his solemn humour returned. "I shall prepare myself for the Yorkshire geese." 3 weeks later, the family library at Penhallow Hall was warm and comfortably chaotic. It was Thursday evening family reading night. A fire cracked merrily in the grate. Constance was sitting on the large Persian rug, reading aloud from a new book of adventures. Rowena sat in a deep armchair watching them. She wore a soft yellow gown, her posture relaxed. "And so," Constance read carefully, "the brave knight drew his turnip." Horatio, sitting on the sofa, closed his eyes. "Constance, the word is sword. How does one draw a turnip in battle? You read triumphant as turnip, Constance pointed out ruthlessly. I assume turnips are very versatile. Rowena laughed a bright, ringing sound. She has a point, Horatio. A well-aimed root vegetable can be devastating. Constance tried to turn the page with too much enthusiasm, and the heavy book slipped from her hands. It hit the floor, knocking over a small stack of other books, scattering pages and covers across the rug. Instinctively, Rowena's muscles twitched. For 5 years, a dropped object had meant she must scramble to mend the disorder, prove her usefulness, earn her place before anyone questioned it. She began to lean forward. Then she stopped. Horatio slid from the sofa and knelt on the rug beside his daughter. He did not summon a servant or glance toward Rowena. He and Constance gathered the books themselves, arguing over which volume belonged at the bottom of the stack. Rowena eased back against the cushions. Her hands stayed in her lap. No one asked her to repair the little disorder, and the sensation was almost absurdly luxurious. Horatio finished stacking the books and stood. He glanced at the sofa he had left, then at the empty cushion beside Rowena's armchair. His eyes met hers. He made no move toward the seat. Rowena smiled. She lifted her hand and tapped the cushion with 2 fingers. "You may sit here, Your Grace," she said softly. "But do try to keep the agricultural weaponry to a minimum." Horatio came over and sat beside her. His shoulder rested a fraction of an inch from hers. Constance found her place and began again, her voice steady and bright. Rowena closed her eyes and listened to the fire. The child's voice and Horatio's quiet breathing beside her. She had not been bought. She had chosen to stay. The end.